Hello. Today is Monday of the first week of Advent. We have lit the first Advent candle, and we're reading the story of Ishtar's Odyssey by Arnaud de Trede. You'll remember that Ishtar discovered a star, and here's a sketch of Ishtar viewing that star through the seeing tube that his father has. Remember, it's a crystal wrapped in a leather tube that helps him to see the stars clearly. Today's chapter is titled The Star. Ishtar sat on his golden throne, dressed in royal robes, with a crown of jewels on his head. He looked across the throne room, filled from wall to wall with his subjects shouting his name in admiration. Ishtar! Ishtar! They sang his praises not out of force or duty, but no! The single word, shouted by one of his uncles, woke Ishtar from his dream. He blinked several times in the bright morning sun, and finally realized he was on the roof of the palace. Sometime in the night he had fallen asleep as his father, uncles, and a dozen other advisors talked their nonsensical talk about that star Ishtar had seen. Now they had charts of the night sky and many texts and scrolls spread out across several low tables, and they were still talking. Someone had covered him with a blanket. Probably Kazim, he decided. Ishtar stretched and stood up. His uncle Bozan was speaking quickly at Salamar in a language Ishtar did not understand. Obviously there was a disagreement. At age 10, Ishtar could already speak and understand several languages, including Latin, Aramaic, Old Umbrian, Hebrew, and Greek, beside his own Persian. "Why do I have to learn Old Umbrian?" Ishtar often complained. "No one speaks it any more." "Well then," his language tutor always replied, "you shall have an advantage. When you and your enemy happen upon a road sign written only in Old Umbrian." Not only did Ishtar have tutors in all these tongues, but the many guests his father brought home for dinner came with their own native dialect. As a child, Ishtar had learned to talk using words from over 20 different languages before he even realized it. He loved it when the guests would assume that he couldn't understand them and made some comment about the meal or the city or politics. More than once, he was able to warn his father of a deceit being planned. But the words his father and uncle spoke now were foreign even to Ishtar, except for that one word, no. Finally, they switched back to Persian as Ishtar stood and wandered over to the group. That's when he noticed his clothes and brushed them in disgust. They were still clean, but completely wrinkled. "It is madness to risk such a venture," Uncle Bozan was saying. "For all we know, this new king might seize the entire caravan and make slaves of us." Salamar slowly shook his head. "Bozan, was it you or was it I who spent 7 years of his youth living amongst the Jews? Was it you or was it I who learned their ways and their hearts?" Ishtar's uncle Jodhpur stepped into the conversation with a soft voice. "Bozan, Salamar is right. His knowledge and experience of this people is superior to ours. If the star were leading us to Lulan or Janjing, we would surely listen to your counsel." The argument continued for several more minutes until Salamar finally noticed his son. "Ah, Ishtar," he said with a hug. "Did you dream of being a king as you slept?" How did everyone seem to know what he was dreaming? Ishtar wondered. Without waiting for an answer, Salamar continued. "Kazim will take you down to the morning meal. Then you must get ready. We have a busy day ahead of us." Ishtar nodded and yawned, and then followed Kazim down the spiral staircase. They passed his sleeping chamber, and Ishtar wished he could climb back into bed and dream some more. The banquet dishes had been cleared away in the dining hall, and in their place was a breakfast banquet for one, Ishtar alone. He sat at the edge of the sofa, a tablecloth spread over a rug, and he used a piece of flat bread to scoop up some halim, a mixture of ground meat and sweetened oatmeal. As he picked up at the dates and pomegranates and peaches and apricots, he planned his day. There were always lessons, of course, and he had no control over those, but between lessons and afterward he could do as he pleased. Today he decided it would please him to play King's Ransom with Kazim after the lesson on engineering and before the lesson in logic, then have a snack of falafel before the lesson on politics. The lesson on politics was exceedingly boring and required a good snack if Ishtar was to stay awake. After his politics lesson would be lunch, of course, and Ishtar decided he'd order a kebab from the kitchen, which is exactly what he decided every day. Next would come his etiquette lesson, language lesson, and afternoon swim. Before dinner would be history, mathematics, science, and a game of passeur, played with 52 wooden markers. Until dinner, he'd sit at the banquet for a time, then head to his astronomy lesson. Ishtar finished his planning his day about the same time he finished eating his dates and drinking his goat's milk. Of course, he had planned his day exactly the same as every other day. Ishtar, stop your daydreaming. It was Varta, the old woman in charge of meals and the household. She had an entire staff of cooks and cleaners and servants. But when it came to Ishtar, she insisted on taking care of things personally. She'd been around as long as Ishtar could remember, and almost as long as Kazim. Malik is waiting, she scolded. Now get to your lessons. Yes, Varta, Ishtar said, and jumped up. He would never dare to talk back to her or disobey her. As he scurried around the pool to his classroom, Ishtar saw his father, uncles, and a long line of other men rushing down the spiral staircase toward the main entrance of the apartment. The men were carrying the scrolls and manuscripts that he'd seen earlier, and Ishtar wanted to ask what was going on. But the look on Salamar's face told him this was not the time to interrupt. In moments they were out the door and down the grand hall, and Ishtar went to his lesson. 2 hours later, Ishtar had finished his logic lesson and was in the middle of studying politics. And so the King of Kings governs all of Persia, his tutor Shamal was saying, but each region has its own king, such as our Sheikh Konarak. Each king has great authority and freedom to rule as he sees best within his region. Ishtar rested his head on one hand while with the other he drew camels on his wax tablet. He'd never actually touched a camel. They were disgusting beasts that smelled horrible, but they were fun to draw. Under his breath, Ishtar complained, I know all this. Shamal stopped for a moment and then dropped to one knee and put his face just inches from Ishtar's, which drew the attention of Kazim standing at the door. Yes, you may know all of this, Shamal whispered, but I have a secret you do not know. Ishtar looked up in surprise. A gust of wind blew through the many open windows of the room, scattering parchments, and for a moment Ishtar suspected his tutor had caused it. A cool breeze was one of the benefits of living at the top of the palace, along with an absence of bad smells and very few insects. But when a shamal hit, the top floor was about the worst place to be. Besides being a man's first name, Shamal was the name of a strong wind that blew in a huge dust storm once or twice a year, a storm that lasted 3 or 4 days. Everything would be normal, with Ishtar learning a lesson or playing a game or swimming in the pool, when suddenly all the servants in the palace would rush in and cover the windows just as the storm hit. Even then, dust made its way into the palace, and it took the servants days to clean it up. Ishtar sometimes suspected his tutor could actually conjure up a shamal wind, but today the only thing on the wind was the secret of Shamal the tutor. "What?" asked Ishtar. "What is your secret?" Shamal looked around to make sure no one could hear him. "Our current king of kings is just a bit," Shamal searched for a kind word, "eccentric," he finally said. Ishtar's face scrunched into a "huh?" look, but then a moment later took on a look of surprise as he understood. "You mean he's crazy, like Nebuchadnezzar?" he said more loudly than Shamal would have liked. Shamal nodded his head and then added, "And so all the sub-kings, such as Sheikh Konarak, are ignoring him and have almost unlimited power." Ishtar tried to process this, but a commotion at the door distracted him. Varta ran in, pulling Kazim by his sleeve, and shouted, "Ishtar, you must get ready immediately. Your father has summoned you." "For what?" Ishtar asked, looking from Varta to Kazim to Shamal and back again. "I do not know," Varta said as she pulled Ishtar to his feet. "All I know is you are to be bathed and dressed in your finest clothes by the 5th bell." The passing of each day was marked by a bell that rang in a tall tower. Some people in the city used it to mark times of prayer. "And you are to see to it," Varta said to Kazim. 20 minutes later, Ishtar had finished the shortest bath he'd ever had, and Kazim saw to it he was dressed in purple silk trousers with gold braiding, a matching purple tunic tied with a gold belt, and a fine wool coat that flowed almost to the floor. Varta then combed his wet hair, which Ishtar insisted he could do himself. "Ow!" he said as she combed. "Oh, that didn't hurt?" Varta scolded, and Ishtar wondered how she knew that, though he still pretended to be wounded. As the 5th bell rang out across the city, Kazim pushed open the towering doors of the throne room and then propelled Ishtar inside. Ishtar's eyes almost popped out of his head as he stared at the room full of the highest nobles, advisors, and teachers of the kingdom, all staring at him. Then he saw King Konarak himself, seated on his throne atop a platform at the far end of the room, wearing the royal robes and the royal crown of gold. The king stood and moved to the edge of the platform and then shouted for all to hear, "Behold, Prince Ishtar, blessed by the gods, friend to the heavens, counselor and magi to Persia." All the nobles, advisors, teachers, and Ishtar's father and uncles, and even the king himself, started applauding so loudly that Ishtar thought the walls might fall down. Some of the men began to cheer. Others bowed low. Ishtar had no idea what was happening, but of one thing he was certain. This was not a dream. We all have dreams of being rich or famous or admired for our talent, and we think we can imagine what it would be like to achieve those dreams. But the truth is that the biggest dreams we can dream are nothing at all compared to the real gifts God wants to give us. Those gifts might not be money or fame or popularity, but when they come from God, they are always far better and far more valuable than anything we can dream up. Colossians tells us, "To them God has chosen to make known among the Gentiles the glorious riches of this mystery, which is Christ in you, the hope of glory." The king has given Ishtar a royal reception for reasons Ishtar doesn't even understand yet. When we put aside our own selfish desires and allow God to have control of our lives and our works, He can use us in ways we never dreamed possible. It will feel like a dream come true.